So, hello everybody, we're back again. Now, usually I wait towards the end of a session to open it up for questions, but if you have some question specifically about the practice that we're doing that you'd like answered before we continue and finish off the practice, this would be a good time to ask. If not, I'll just continue.
May I?
Yeah.
As far as the lights coming into the body, there's no visualization of darkness leaving the body and light enlightening the body. It's just the bright light. Is that correct?
I didn't understand what you said.
In some practices for purification, you visualize that the light comes in and sort of washes out the darkness that goes out by the feet or something like this, even Scorpio sometimes, so that the bad things go out by your feet. In this visualization, it's not the case. Is that correct?
It can be done the way you described. It can be done that way. But earlier on, I said that there was I would, if I had time, I would get into, and those more elaborate ways include the kinds of things that you were saying. But I will, for the purposes of keeping it simple, I just simply wanted the light to come in, and like when a light comes into a dark room, the darkness doesn't go anywhere, it just disappears. And that was the kind of the visualization I was thinking of. But what you said, using the light to wash things through, that's possible. And if there's more time, I'll give that more elaborate visualization.
But this way is also very nice. So I just wanted to check, but it's also very, very nice this way. So it's no problem with that. Thank you.
Good. Any other question I'm not going to answer? No. Okay. So let's continue, and then if there's time and space, I'll get into these alternative visualizations that was brought up in Catherine's remark. Also, during the first session, I mentioned that there was a video on YouTube in which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is giving the transmission of the mantra, the 6-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara, of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hum. And now we have the address for that. So I think it's been or will be posted in the chat, and you can look it up there. And that gives a sense of how a transmission is given and how it's practiced initially. And then, of course, once you have the mantra, then you can recite it any way that's appropriate, slowly, fastly, silently, out loud, whatever. Okay. Oh, one other thing I should mention before I start is yesterday I indicated that there was a teaching that Lama Yeshe gave a very long time ago. And in it, because these teachings were taking place over the Christmas season, he focused a lot of the teachings around how to actually celebrate Christmas. And then as part of that, knowing that so many of his followers were close to the Christian tradition, he answered a request to be able to give a meditation practice focusing on Jesus as the central figure. And I indicated that if people would like that practice sent to them, then I'm very happy to do it. And 3 people, Alec, Ruth, and Naz, made that request. So I'll be sending it out to them in the next day or 2. And if anybody else is interested in that practice, then just send me, don't tell me now, just send me in email, and then I'll send it back to you as soon as it's ready. Okay.
Thanks in advance.
Okay. So we ended the morning session by having gone through this particular version of the remedy, meaning what the opponent power is going to be that will help cleanse away whatever negative or destructive action we may have committed that we need to have purified. And that practice, specifically in terms of this course, was given through the recitation of the mantra, the Buddha mantra, Tayata Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha. But I hasten to add, to repeat, that this is only one type of remedial action that can be taken. And one of the main reasons I chose it here is that this entire practice is modeled after a Vajrayana, or a tantric practice, focusing on the figure of Vajrasattva. It follows very many of the same structures that's available in that Vajrasattva practice. And it was a very typical practice of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopache that every year, once the November course that was finished, many people would go into Vajrasattva retreat. And during that retreat, they would recite the mantra of Vajrasattva as part of their practice. And that's a very long mantra. That's a 100-syllable mantra. And a commitment many people took on was to recite 100,000 of those in however long it took, which was usually about 2.5 or 3 months, or it could be spread out over years if necessary. But if it was done as one meditation retreat, it usually took 2 or 3 months to do. But of course, it would have taken 2 or 3 years to do it if the mantra was recited really slowly. So during that retreat, one learned how to recite it quickly while doing all the appropriate meditations. So I thought, since this practice is modeled after the Vajrasattva practice, but is simplified and has a much shorter mantra, that I thought it would be made helpful just to model how it could be done if you were doing this practice either as a group or as your own retreat, how you might approach it. But of course, there's many other practices as well that could be done. And as I indicated, that there's even this practice can be done with a slightly more complex visualization. But I'll only get into that if there's enough space a little bit later on. Otherwise, that's something that you can find out. It's widely reproduced, and you can find it out elsewhere. So there's been the power of regret, a clear recognition of a mistake that one may have meant that one might have, sorry, my English is failing me, that someone may have committed, or any particular suffering result we may be experiencing already. And then on the basis of that, applying the what it is that we rely on to so that we can diminish that suffering or don't have to experience it. So that's basically focusing on taking refuge and cultivating the compassionate bodhicitta motivation. And then the power of the remedy, which, as I said, for what we did here was focused on the receiving the rays of light, the purifying rays of light, together with the recitation of the mantra. And once we have done a practice like that for a while, what we often discover is that at the end of it, even if we're only doing it for a few minutes, usually we discover that some kind of lightness has been experienced, some kind of calmness, some quality of mind that may not have been there before. And whatever it was, even if it's just a slight feeling of calmness or spaciousness, whatever it might be that seems open and beneficial, then at the end, it's very helpful just to rest in that experience, not thinking about it, not telling stories about it, not investigating it, but just, as it were, marinating the mind in that openness, in that calmness, in that clarity. And it is a bit like marinating food. You make a sauce or marinade somehow, and then you take whatever food you want to take on that flavor, and you put the food in the marinade, and it soaks up that taste. Well, it's very similar. You've created a marinade. You've created some kind of space, some kind of openness, some kind of calmness or clarity. It doesn't have to be terribly profound, but it's something that wasn't there before you started the practice. Some new, some different, some somewhat evolved state of mind, some clarity. And then you just rest in it, even for a few moments. It's very, very helpful. And it takes on the flavor of that experience. Okay. So then the next, the last of the four opponent power is the power of the resolve. And that involves making a resolution not to repeat, to refrain from repeating whatever action it was that you were attempting to purify on the preceding practice. So, for example, if you notice that you have this tendency, sometimes just willy-nilly, saying something that's just not true, not as a joke, but just lying, or misleading people, or engaging in some kind of behavior like that, and you begin to recognize that that is not helpful at all, is actually quite destructive, then when you finish the practice, in which you've focused a lot on purifying the power of your speech, then it's very, very helpful then to make a decision not to engage in that same kind of action again. But you have to make that that resolution, that resolve, in a realistic way. For example, in your history, if you go back many, many years, there may have been something that you did when you were a lot younger that you really think was terrible, maybe even unforgivable, right? And it's so bad that you never want to do it again. So as you're purifying that action in your meditation, when you reach the resolve, you can very honestly say, I make the heartfelt resolution never to do that particular action again. Right? And that's realistic. But let's say it's an action which is something that has occurred in your life repeatedly over many, many years. It's a habit, like like for myself, of using sarcastic language or ironic language, which sometimes is not helpful at all, right? So if I made the resolution never to speak like that again, I'd have to purify it. I would break it within a matter of minutes, maybe even seconds, right? Because it's a strong habit. So realistically, it doesn't make sense for me to vow I'll never do it again, because in all likelihood, I will do it again. Until that habit disappears, it's very likely I will do it again. Right? So then the advice can be, all right, refrain from that action, whatever it is, for a certain amount of time, a reasonable amount of time. If it's something that you do only occasionally and you have somewhat control of, then you can say, I won't do that action this whole month. I'll refrain from doing that this whole month. I'll refrain from getting angry at the neighbor for a whole month, even though he does things that annoy me all the time. And then if the month seems too long, I'll refrain for it for a week. Well, at least I won't do it tomorrow. I won't do it the rest of today. I won't do it for an hour. I won't do it for 5 seconds. In other words, you choose a period of time that's realistic in your experience. Right? Then, if even making that kind of resolution, you find that you abrogate it, that you disobey it, you break it, right? Well, then do another round of purification. Mistakes aren't carved into stone. It's all a matter of the mind. The mind is flexible. The mind is changeable. You can always apply the power of purification. In fact, it's very strongly recommended that if we have a purification practice that we like a lot, and it could be this one, it could be the Vajrasa practice that I mentioned before, it could be something else, that it's a very good idea to do a little bit of it every day in the beginning to purify whatever may have happened during the night, and a bit at the end of the day to purify anything that happened during the day. To keep that purification practice going. And then occasionally actually doing some kind of retreat of purification. Now, having said that, it's skillful to choose the amount of time in a realistic fashion that you are making the resolution that you're going to refrain from that action in. And I had heard that advice from a number of my teachers. On one occasion, not too terribly long ago, when the same question was put into His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he recommended making the resolution as strong as possible. In other words, I'll never do it again. Right? And that surprised me a little bit, because all my other teachers had recommended this approach where you make a time period that fits. But I think it's always hazardous for someone like me to guess why His Holiness taught it that way, was that by making a very, very strong resolution, even if you can't keep it right away, it builds up a habit for paying attention to that particular habit and try to, to that particular negative action with a strong determination to eliminate it as much as possible. And then, if you slip up, if something occurs and you discover, oh, I vowed to myself I would never say that kind of thing again, and there it was, I just said it. If that happens, well, you don't have to beat yourself. You don't have to take out your whips and flagellate yourself. It's not like that. You then apply opponent force to it. You just purify that. So it's up to each of us individually how we do this practice. There's different instructions, and we should follow those instructions that seem to work for us. And it's always a good idea to kind of see if slowly we can expand the scope of our practice. So like initially, there might be a habit that we can only vow that I won't do it for another day, but maybe at a certain point we can expand it and really mean I won't do it ever again and build up to that. So it's up to us individually. There's nobody outside ourselves that can tell us the only way to do the practice. Um, and that's one of the reasons why I've tried to offer different ways of making the practice legitimate, but fashioned to our own individual needs. And that reminds me of a story. It's not as involved a story as some of the other ones that we like, but it was a very noticeable one for me. When I used to take teachings, especially when I took them from Lama Yeshe, because he had such an unusual style of teaching and addressing questions that people would have based on their practice. So on one occasion, I was attending a ceremony that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa were leading in Kopan, in the main monastery in Nepal, Kathmandu. And during that, we were taking what's known as the 8 Mahayana precepts. These are vows that one takes for a 24-hour period. You take it in the morning before the sunrise, and then you vow to avoid certain activities, some which many people vow to avoid for their whole life, like alcohol and all kinds of things like that. And then also included for that 24-hour period, certain things which are not in of themselves negative, but which dilute the strength of that 24-hour practice, such as singing and dancing with for not for any spiritual reason, but just kind of like just something to do. Just filling the time. So there's these 8 vows that we take for that 24-hour period. And then there's a mantra to be recited that seals that resolution. And the advice is that if you, before you go to bed that night, you recite that mantra again to purify any mistakes you may have made during that 24-hour period. And so afterwards, after we had this ceremony, it's a very lovely ceremony, and we're engaged in the practice. Oh yeah, and in that practice, you just eat once a day. So after that was probably the practice that Catherine came in on. They just have the noontime meal, and then you don't eat again until the next morning. So again, there's nothing immoral about eating after noon, but as part of that practice, having just one meal a day, it strengthens strengthens the practice very much. So, so the ceremony was given, and the explanations were given, and someone asked a question, and he said, he says, "What happens if during the day I discover that I've done something which contravenes one of these restraints? Like if I find myself suddenly singing a popular song, or just taking a bite out of a cookie, or something like that. In other words, one of the minor vows. What should I do if I find that I've done that, kind of mindlessly out of habit?" And well, whenever a situation like that came where my teachers, especially Lama Yeshe, was asked a question, it was always my habit to think, now, how is he going to answer that? If I were in that position where the question was asked for me, how would I answer it? And then just to compare whatever it came up in my mind with what, the teacher actually said. So that went through my mind, and I was really, I remember being a bit unsure what a skillful and honest way would be to answer a question like that. It only took just a second or so for me to have that thought. And in the meantime, Lama Yeshe answered the question. So the question again is, what should I do if I've discovered I've broken one of these vows? And his answer, I can remember it so clearly today. He became very animated. He said, you should rejoice, dear. You should rejoice. And I thought, well, of all the possible answers to that question, rejoicing was the last one that I would have come up with. It was like out from left field. Where did that answer come from? But he obviously really meant it. And he was very even excited about it. You should rejoice. And then he explained what he meant. He said, in our lifetime, we do so many things mindlessly, whether it's whistling a show tune, or whether it's grabbing a snack to eat, or anything. There's a lot of things that we do that we're not even really aware we're doing it. It's like we're sleepwalking. We're sleepwalking through the life. It's not as if any of those things in and of themselves are horrible, but they are actions, but they're occurring without any mindfulness at all. But on this occasion, if we were to eat a cookie that wasn't allowed for us that day, or whistle or sing a song that wasn't allowed for us for that day because of the vow that we took, by the strength of the vow, we become aware of it. It's not something that's mindless anymore. It's brought to the forefront of our consciousness, the forefront of our awareness. And that's what we should rejoice. Not that we rejoice that we contravene the vow, but rejoice that the vow worked properly to make us aware of what we've done. And that's the point, to bring that level of awareness. And then, of course, then he would added after that, he said, of course, once you're aware of it, then there's things you can do. So there's that mantra that's part of the ceremony. You can recite that mantra a few times. You can, there's whole purification practices that you could do, but there's ways built into the practice of purifying anything like that. But the main reason that he was saying rejoicing was that the whole purpose of any vow is to bring a level of awareness to our behavior, because it's only with that awareness that we can make the separation between those actions which are harmful or meaningless, that are better to avoid or put aside, and those actions which are meaningful and are helpful if we augment, and concentrate on. So I remember when he said, what should you do? Rejoice, like that. And he had this happy, excited expression on his face when he said it. Completely blew my little mind. And not for the only time. Okay. So that was the power of the resolve. Now, going through those four, and then resting for a moment at the conclusion of the practice is mainly is the main extent of the practice. But then there is how you actually end it, how you absorb the practice at the end. So here I've given on number 5 on the outline what's called the final absorption. Okay. And I'll just read it out loud and see if it needs some comment. Let's see. So remember, we started the whole practice by invoking the source of our inspiration, either in the form of a guru, the Buddha, or simply a sphere of light, or however we choose to relate to it. Okay. So we've started by invoking that. identifying it as the source of our inspiration, the source of our spiritual development. And now we imagine that source of inspiration, the one that you had visualized before, now melts into a sphere of golden light that contracts and becomes more concentrated as it comes to the space just above the crown of your head. So before, if you've been doing this visualization, then you have this sphere and whatever's contained in it, like the Buddha image, in front of you, like at the level of your forehead, a body's length away, something like that. And now you imagine it, visualize it if you can't. If you can't visualize it, then just simply imagine it, that this sphere and the enlightened being that it contains becomes smaller and smaller until it's just the size of a very small sphere, which then comes, you feel it coming and hovering right above the crown of your head, like that. And that's a good thing to do a bit slowly, because then you can really get a feeling that if you've been feeling during the practice that you actually did receive something in terms of light or mantra energy, and that now the source of that mantra and light energy, the source of that dharma is now coming closer to you, becoming more concentrated, becoming brighter, and then hovering above the crown of your head. And you can feel it up there. If your imagination is strong enough. If your imagination isn't that strong, you can just simply touch very tight, just very lightly, just touch the crown of your head. Just tap it. And your attention will go there, and then just feel that's where that small concentrated sphere of light is ending up. Okay? And then it says, now this concentrated sphere of radiant golden light then slowly descends through your crown until it comes to rest at the very center of your heart chakra. I think the term chakra is familiar to most of you, but for those who are not familiar with that, there is the heart, the physical heart, which is to the left of center, and then at the very medium of the body, right in the center, at the level of heart, but deep within you, there is this chakra, which is a Sanskrit word for a wheel. It's a center of energy, and this is the deepest residential place of your most purified aspect of consciousness. It's this seat of consciousness. And so you imagine this concentrated sphere of light descending down the median of the body, what's known as the central channel, until it comes to rest right in the center of that heart chakra, the deepest center of your being. Okay, so here we're not focusing so much on our physical body, but the subtle body that is contained, energy body that's contained within it. And I recently took some teachings by one of my major teachers, Venerable Rene, and in that teaching, this practice was also done of invoking one's guru to the top of one's head and having that teacher become more concentrated, smaller, and then descending the central channel to the heart. And he emphasized, do this descent of the spiritual master into the heart. Do it very slowly, even centimeter by centimeter, if you can manage it, because as it enters, as it first touches the crown of your head and then begins to descend, it energizes the psychic nervous system. And Lama Yeshe used to emphasize that a lot as well. It's like a kind of an explosion of blissful energy that you can actually feel, even at initial levels of meditation, and much, much more, I'm told, that when our concentration becomes really good. And so you follow this descent of this energy slowly, so you end up energizing your entire psychic nervous system, and then you allow it to come to rest in the center of your heart chakra. So a very similar practice was done in Venerable Renee's course recently. Okay. Now, when it comes to rest in the heart chakra, feel, as it says here, that your ordinary sense of self, your ordinary sense of being a limited being with faults and so forth, all of those wrong conceptions, all those limited conceptions, all the things that are not what is authentic about our being, all of that disappear completely in that blissful, spacious experience of the guru or the source of inspiration having come to rest at the very center of our being in our heart chakra. So I'll just read that paragraph again. This concentrated sphere of radiant golden light then slowly descends through your crown until it comes to rest at the very center of your heart chakra. Your ordinary sense of self, unworthy, limited, and burdened with faults, and all your wrong conceptions disappear completely. In that instant, you become one with Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's holy body in the aspect of vast and boundless space. So any imagery that you can use that gives you the feeling that things that were tight are becoming loose, things that were frozen are becoming melted, things that are claustrophobic become spacious. It used any and all of that imagery, whatever works, to cultivate this feeling of boundless spaciousness and identify that as identical with Shakyamuni Buddha's holy body. Okay. Concentrate on this limitlessly spacious experience for as long as possible, allowing no other thoughts or ordinary appearances to distract you. Sometimes you might have this experience for just a flash, just for a moment or two, and it may disappear quickly. Other times, for whatever reason on that particular day, it might be a very genuine experience that lasts for a significant amount of time. So don't worry, don't judge it. Just whatever arises, be content with that, and identify that your mind and the Buddha's mind, or the mind of whatever the source of inspiration that you've chosen, are now identical. Okay. That doesn't mean you've become a different person. It's not like you've had a personality transplant. But it is that, as was said right from the very beginning when I was quoting the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, the deepest essence of all sentient beings' mind is a purity which exists no matter how much roughness or coarseness there is in the peripheral aspects of our being. At the core of our being, there's this openness, there's this full potentiality, there's everything that's needed to grow into the full enlightened experience. So at that point, it is valid to think that you have achieved a union, oneness with Buddha's own mind. Right? It doesn't mean that you jump up from your seat, and discover that your earlobes have become long and you go out and you preach the Dharma to everyone you meet. It doesn't mean that. It means that you've discovered, or at least tasted, or sniffed some aspect of the deep true nature of all beings' mind, identical with enlightenment, with the enlightened mind. Okay. And then having tasted it, you just stay in it for as long as possible. As I said, it might be just a few brief moments. It might be something that generates a certain amount of stability. Right? Okay. Many of you have heard of probably the most beloved figure in all of Tibetan history, the great yogi Milarepa. And his life story is absolutely amazing. Earlier in his life, he actually was personally responsible for the death through murderous means of a whole bunch of humans and animals. So that was a pretty low point in his life, right? But then he met his guru Marpa. He engaged in very powerful purification practices, not any of the ones that were described here. His purification practices given to him by his guru was to build towers and then tear them down and build them up again, and then tear them down and build them up again. That was his purification practice. But through his great devotion to his teacher and the strength of his practice, this former murderer achieved not just personal liberation from suffering, not just promise of a higher rebirth, but full and complete enlightenment in that same lifetime. So it's extremely famous, and his life story is one of the most read and most inspiring of all the spiritual biographies that exist in the Tibetan system. Milarepa, you'd enjoy reading more about him. Also, he was famous because he spontaneously sang songs of spiritual realization. And those songs are still sung among the Tibetans today, 1,000 years later. And they've been reproduced in poetry collections and so forth. But the reason I wanted to mention Milarepa particularly was that one famous quotation from his life concerned his practice, which in his tradition was called Mahamudra, the Great Seal, which has to do with the fundamental nature of the mind, the Mahamudra practice. And so he explained how he achieved the end of his path. The final realization was that when I discovered that my mind and the mind of my guru and the mind of the Buddha were the same, I spontaneously realized Mahamudra. That's not an exact quotation. Not only it's English, not Tibetan, but it's not an exact translation, but it's very, very close to what Milarepa said. So there, the whole evolution of the practice culminated in a direct realization of the identity of his mind, the Buddha's mind, and his guru's mind. And with that identification, he achieved full enlightenment. So here in this practice, we're sort of preparing for something like that. We're trying to find that part within ourselves, which is not limited, which is not circumscribed, which is not covered by delusion and mistaken views of reality, but which has a certain purity, and identifying it as being identical with Buddha mind, a fulfillment of our Buddhist potential. So that experience, even as I indicated, even if we can just get a fabricated taste of it, I mean, in Milarepa's case, it was a direct realization of it. That's a different matter, right? But even if we can get a brief approximation of it, you know, just, what's the expression? Fake it until you make it, you know, something like that. That's very, very powerful way of proceeding along the path, you know. So that that ends here, where it says the final absorption. Okay. Now, there are things that follow. So I want to read the note, and that's on the top of page 4, that comes after where it says final absorption. The note is, if you're doing a briefer practice, you may stop now. Sorry, I misread that. You may now dedicate the meritorious energy of your practice as in section 8 below, right? But if you want to do a somewhat more elaborate practice, then at this point you continue with sections 6 and 7. Right? So that's completely up to you, depending on time and energy and so forth. Once that absorption is finished, then you may go to the last section, 8, the dedication section, which we will do, and bring the practice to a close. But if you have more time and more energy, you want to do something somewhat more elaborate, then before you go to 8, then you do 6 and 7. So what is 6? Remember, we ended 5 having dissolved all our limited conception of self into an experience of vast empty space. It's not empty like a dull vacuum. It's empty in the sense that it has no solid, concrete, limiting quality to it, but has the spaciousness, the same spaciousness that the mind of a fully awakened being has. Okay, so that's where we ended at the end of section 5. So now with 6, with reemergence, it says, instantly from this empty space, there appear in the place where you were sitting, right? So in one sense, you're no longer there, you know, because you've been concentrating not on your physical body, you've been concentrating on your, as we might say, your mental body. And now you're going to reemerge from that space. So where do you reemerge? You reemerge from that space where your body is seated, you know. So from this empty space, there appear in the place where you were sitting all the things that made up your initial visualization. And in the elaborate visualization, you might remember in space, you visualize a throne or a platform on which there is a seat made of a lotus, then a sun cushion with a moon cushion on top. And on top of this, one's own mind in the aspect of, on top of that, the enlightened being visualized as Shakyamuni Buddha, or whatever figure of inspiration is meaningful to you, okay? So now you had dissolved by the end of section 5, all ordinary appearances into the vastness of open space. So now there appears in the place where you're sitting, what you had visualized before, starting with the support, the throne, and the lotus on top of that, the sun cushion on top of that, the moon seat on top of that, and then on top of that, your own mind in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay? So you're really identifying yourself as being indifferentiable from the very Buddha who is your source of inspiration. Everything is in the nature of light, exactly as you had visualized it earlier. Cultivate the feeling that you are Buddha and concentrate it undistractedly on this enlightened identity. Okay? Now, this part of the practice raises a question, especially for people who have a past experience of having received Vajrayana or Tantric initiation, through which we get the permission to view ourselves as taking on the identity of a meditational deity such as Tara or Manjushri or Avalokiteshvara. But in this case, we can visualize ourselves as taking on the identity of Shakyamuni Buddha without any prior initiation or ceremony at all. It's open. And I remember asking one of my own teachers, why can we do that with Shakyamuni's practice when in order to do it with any of the other practices, in other words, let's say if our deity that we connect with is Tara, the female deity of compassion, or Avalokiteshvara, the male deity of compassion. Let's say we're practicing one of those. We can visualize, without an initiation or empowerment, we can visualize any of those deities and receive blessings from them. But in order to visualize ourselves as that deity, do what's known as the self-generation, then we need to be empowered to do it. Without the empowerment, we can't do it. It's not as if we're forbidden to do it. We can't do it. We haven't received the seed of that practice from the teacher in the empowerment ceremony. But for Shakyamuni Buddha, it's different. We don't have to receive any empowerment ceremony. So I asked this teacher, Kirti Tsencham Rinpoche, what's his name? Why is it available for Shakyamuni Buddha and not for the others? He said, because this is not actually a tantric practice in which we're receiving the seed of the practice from the guru in a empowerment ceremony, in which we actually receive something that grows into the experience of the meditational deity we have in mind. It's not that. It looks like it. It's based on that. But there is a subtle, important difference. In this practice, visualizing ourselves as Shakyamuni Buddha is just a simple way of expressing our wish to become or to possess the same kind of beneficial body, speech, and mind of a Buddha, so that like him and like the other great spiritual teachers, we can be of limitless benefit to others. In other words, it's the expression of a wish. It's an expression of a wish to manifest our own Buddha potential, our own Tathagata Garbha, what we started talking about in the very beginning. So to do that, anybody can cultivate that wish. Anyone can cultivate that motivation, that intention. We don't have to receive tantric empowerment to do that. We just have to have the kind of Mahayana or great vehicle mindset, which sees the value of emulating the path of a Buddha, so that like him and like all the other great masters, we can be of limitless benefit to countless beings like that. So it's simply an expression of our wish to manifest our potentially enlightened nature, right? So it is allowable. There's no restriction on doing the self-generation as the Buddha, because it's simply a manifestation of our highest wish, our highest intention to achieve enlightenment for the sake of benefiting others. So it's not as if that because we've had that intention to benefit other, and because we're visualizing ourselves as inseparable from Buddha, that automatically we become an all-powerful Buddha. It doesn't work like that. But it sets the stage for cultivating those qualities, which eventually, after some time, which may be lifetimes, it may be much quicker than that, we will actually be able to fully identify with and develop our enlightened potential and be able to benefit others to the same extent as these great beings from the past, from Buddha down to the present time. Does that make some sense? Yeah, okay. So, so at the end of number 6, the reemergence, it said, Cultivate the feeling that you are Buddha and concentrate undistractedly on this enlightened identity. And then there's still one more section before we reach the final dedication. And again, you can expand or contract this as you like. But number 7 is benefiting others. So the whole purpose for taking, trying to arouse our enlightened potential is not so that we feel so great. It's not that we're in it for the bliss. It's not that. It's that it's the recognition that if we were able to overcome our limitation and develop the same kind of spacious and beneficial body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being, we could help others tremendously. Way, way beyond the meager kind of help that ordinary beings can give now. We can give the kind of help which Buddha gave 2,500 years ago, and it's still benefiting millions of people. Or take His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Just check out what he does with his life 24 hours a day. It's like a ceaseless source of enlightening energy, bringing benefit to countless beings like that. Or one could take the example of Kepche Zopa Rinpoche, who passed beyond the need for sleep and just gives continually. That even when his body manifested a stroke that paralyzed part of his body, instead of causing him any distress, just became something for him to laugh at and show that need not be a limitation if your mind is in the right place. So I get tired after doing 5 minutes of practice. Lama Zopa doesn't get tired after practicing 24 hours a day. How's that possible? That's because of what he's discovered within himself. And it's not that he then retires so that he can feel good and blissful in his own little cave. It's so that he can come out of that cave and give limitless benefit to others. Right? So that's where 7 comes in. That at the end of the practice, it isn't just retiring into your own blissful enlightenment, it's helping others. So that also forms a basis of this practice that we're doing. We're practicing in order to eventually reach that goal. So at the end of 6, we're identifying ourselves as being inseparable from the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, and we're concentrating undistractedly on this enlightened identity. Okay. Now, 7, turning your attention to the sentient beings surrounding you in every direction. And remember, when we started, we mentioned that no matter how we visualize our situation geographically, we are indeed surrounded by, just in terms of human beings on this planet, 7 billion other beings. And then the numbers go way up into the billions and trillions and quadrillions if we include all the other kinds of beings that there are, starting with the animals. Okay, so we are in the center of a group of beings who, like ourselves, only want to be happy and only want to avoid suffering. Right? So we turn our attention to these sentient beings surrounding us in every direction, and generate love and compassion for them by recalling that they all want to achieve happiness, peace of mind, and fulfillment, and they all want to experience freedom from dissatisfaction and suffering. In other words, we revisit the same kind of considerations we had when we were practicing the 4 immeasurables of equanimity, love, compassion, and joy. Okay? We just remind ourselves of that. And then with this heartfelt understanding, we send forth from the center of our heart multicolored rays of light in all directions as we recite that mantra again. Tayata omuni muni maha muni yasaha. So now we're reciting the mantra, and the mantra now is coming from our own heart. Because remember, at this point, our heart is identical with the heart of Shakyamuni Buddha in terms of this practice, right? In terms of our aspiration. So as these light rays from our heart reach the countless beings surrounding us, they bring healing energy, inspiration, strength, and whatever is needed to bestow upon them temporary and ultimate happiness. So in a situation where people are in, let's say, a warring conflict, and a lot of destruction is taking place, beings doing this kind of practice from their heart are sending out, not only wishes for their happiness and their avoidance of suffering, but wishes for peace. Okay, visualizing that. So then it goes on. Visualize that all these surrounding beings fulfill their enlightened potential and are transformed into Buddhas, experiencing great blissful wisdom. So the same kind of transformation that we did for ourselves, we imagine all of these other beings experiencing. Now we can say, well, how can they do it? Hardly any of them are doing any kind of practice at all. And my practice was just imagination. Well, the thing is, the reason they can do it is because every being has the Buddha nature. Every being has the potential to achieve enlightenment. There's nothing solid and concrete and self-existent preventing any being from experiencing this. It's just a matter of familiarity, of changing the focus of one's identity. Okay? So now we're imagining all these beings who have progressively moved through whatever state they're in now to a state of great blissful wisdom. And then the practice ends. It says, all these Buddhas, in other words, all these transformed sentient beings around us, then dissolve into your heart like snowflakes falling into a mountain lake, inducing an experience of inexpressible bliss and joy. I didn't write bliss there, but that's usually the way I recite it. Inducing an experience of inexpressible bliss and joy. And that brings the practice to a close, but no practice is fully finished without a dedication of the energy generated through that practice. And that's what we will conclude with. But we still have, about 22 minutes before we have to conclude this session. So if there's something that you'd like to bring up, if I can respond to it in a helpful manner, I will. If not, then I'll put that as a question that's to be answered later by somebody. So is there anything before this weekend course comes to its final conclusion that you'd like to bring up? Yes, it's hard for me to read your name.
Oh, Sneh.
Yeah, I'm trying to read it. I can't. Snaley?
Sneh.
How do you pronounce that?
It sounds like S-N-A-Y.
Oh, Sneh. Okay, thank you. I couldn't read it. It was so small. My eyes are so bad. Thank you, Sneh.
Thank you for such a lovely weekend of teachings, John. It really has helped me so much with my sadhana practice, these visualizations. The question I had was when you were explaining the meaning of Mahamuni, and you were saying, it is to think about that he has the ability to eradicate those subtle stains in the consciousness. And I've always had a difficult time understanding that, and they say that's related to the Buddha's omniscience. So I've never understood what it means, like for a Buddha to be omniscient. And like what these subtle stains or obscurations of knowledge really represent?
You know, you've asked a question that's been on my mind for like something like 45 years now. I've heard teachings on it, I've heard explanations, but have yet to hear anything that completely eradicates certain nagging doubts that I have. And I think part of it is because the idea of omniscience is so far beyond what I can even imagine that it's hard for me to connect with it. But it's definitely something that all the great teachers I've had have said. Some of my fellow students, when I ask them, do you think that omniscience is possible? They say, oh, I have no doubt it's possible. And then you can read great masters like Dharmakirti in the past, and they talk about it as well. So because of my faith in the general practice, I feel that there must be a way of understanding it. I just haven't reached it yet myself. But I have a little bit of a feeling for what it might be. This gets a little bit technical at some point, so if not everything that I say is crystal clear, it's not only a reflection of my lack of clarity, but also because the subject matter is quite subtle. Right? The pure nature of our mind, this radiance we've been talking about, the Buddha nature, is obscured by two coverings. And one is the covering of the afflictions. In Sanskrit, that's the klesha varana. Right? And these are the things that produce suffering. So it's the presence of hatred and attachment and jealousy and arrogance and all the whole attendant host of negative mental states and emotions are served to obscure our fundamental nature. And they are directly responsible for our suffering. And they're responsible for our suffering because under their influence, we engage in destructive actions. You know, so like under the power of hatred, we might kill, for example. And then those destructive actions, those karma, leave a karmic residue on our mind, which eventually, sooner or later, ripen in an experience of suffering. So the first layer covering our mind is the layer that's there due to this ignorance of, I forgot an important point. All of these afflictions, hatred, jealousy, all of these, they arise from a fundamental delusion of viewing ourselves and all other phenomena as being separate, concrete, self-contained, inherently existent entities, rather than being dependent arisings and mere appearances. Okay, that's a very, very subtle point, just covered in a few quick words, right? But all of these, the reason we feel hatred is because we hold on to a sense of a self, a concrete, self-existent self, identity of self. And if we ever feel it's threatened, then we feel anger towards who's ever threatening it. And if we feel deprived, then we try to promote it and maintain it. And we become attached to everything that we think supports this concrete, separate sense of I. And so from holding on to this concrete, separate sense of I, me, and mine, we engage in all these kinds of actions of attachment and aversion, which produce suffering, not only to others, but eventually to ourselves when the results of these negative actions come back upon us, okay? So this first covering, the covering of the klesha, covering of the afflictions, the klesha avarana, is the first grosser covering on the on our mind. to be removed, right? And all of the practices at the initial stages, remember I said this path to enlightenment can be thought of in terms of 3 progressive levels of motivation, okay? So all the practices on the first level, in which we're refraining from the strongly negative actions that bring strong suffering results, and all the practices on the second level of motivation, which through practices of morality and concentration and wisdom have the ability to actually cut through that fiction of a concrete self-existent I. So all of those, everything contained in those first 2 sections, serve directly to remove the klesha varana. There are certain kleshas that can be removed very, very quickly. There's others that take a very long time, deeply ingrained, but all of them through the combined practices of concentration, morality, concentration, and wisdom, they can be overcome. Okay. And that attainment, where the klesha varna is completely removed, is what we call nirvana, or in the context of this course, I've been calling the lower nirvana. But it still leaves the subtler levels of obstruction called the jnana varna. Jnana varna. Sorry, my Sanskrit pronunciation is as bad as my English pronunciation. Anyway, it's the cognitive coverings. The first was the afflictive coverings, and now I think it's called the cognitive coverings, which is a subtle level. Now, this subtle level of covering isn't responsible for suffering, right? So if we get rid of the klesha varna, the rougher one, we are beyond suffering. We do experience nirvana, the freedom from suffering, and it will never return. It's fully banished. But as long as the jnana varna is still there, it has the effect of how the world appears to us. So that even though we don't have the affliction of believing that ourself or others have a concrete, separate identity, we've gotten past that belief, things still appear to our consciousness that way. That's how the motion picture gets projected to our mind, because of the filter, or maybe the boundary, let's say, of this subtler covering, to the jnana varna. And so that's why, even though we may no longer believe I'm a concrete, separate individual, I understand I'm a dependent arising, I have this relationship with other beings, things aren't as solid as they appear. Even though we still have that kind of understanding, still, when we open our mind, or you open our eyes, or use our mind, things appear to us separately, like that. Okay. So now, through continued practice, especially a practice in which our bodhicitta motivation, in the most expansive way imaginable. So we're cutting through even this subtler layer of covering or delusion, right? It's not an afflictive delusion anymore, but it's something that affects the way things just appear to us. Then it is said that with that, then there's no longer anything obstructing our ability to cognize anything that exists. There's no longer any separation between the mind that cognizes and that which can be cognized. It doesn't matter where they are, how distant they are, what their nature is. All of that is mirrored in the enlightened being's mind. And so that's the difference, we could say, between someone who has achieved personal liberation, the lower nirvana, has become what's termed in Arhat, Shravaka, Arhat or Pratyeka Buddha Arhat and has gone beyond suffering, but has not yet achieved the full enlightenment of Buddhahood, which has within it this limitless ability to cognize all phenomena or omniscience. So I have a strong feeling that what I said, minus a few mispronunciations and so forth, and glitches, because my mouth doesn't always work the way my mind wants it to, right? I have a feeling that explanation is accurate, right? But even though I think the explanation is accurate, being able to fully take on board what it means, how to relate to it, I'm still grasping at that. But I think it's true. I think it's true. So I think it's probably in relationship to that mystery that the whole question of omniscience can be solved. Is that helpful at all?
It was very helpful, and like you said, it'll take a long time to fully understand the implications, but at least I understood two things which I didn't understand before, which you said. One is that the cognitive obscurations have nothing to do with suffering like the klesha avarana does, but but when you said cognitive, then it finally clicked, like, because cognitive is how we think and how we see things. And you were saying that, that is how everything appears to me to still be separate. Like, that's a cognitive problem I have.
Yeah.
And, how it works itself out is, like you said, a mystery, but at least now I understand the difference between the two. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you for asking it. And also thank my gurus for, even though my understanding is very incomplete, I wouldn't have had any of that without the influence of my teachers. And so I thank them for whatever little ability I have to share it with, however imperfectly, with others. So you just have to make me a promise. When you finally fully understand it, then you'll find me and teach me what it is. Because that's how it works.
Yeah, because, the other thing I have found confusing is...
We do what we can.
Yeah. Is, the word omniscience, at least in the West, like when you use it, you say, oh, if you have omniscience, like, I can tell you when your car is going to break down, or I can tell you when, the next lunar eclipse will happen, without any math or whatever. And so sometimes when I think about the Buddha's omniscience, like, all these ideas come to my mind, and I don't think that is what is meant by his omniscience.
Yeah. Actually, I think you put your finger on it, and is that omniscience, the very word kind of freaked me out, because it was always associated with things from traditions which I didn't understand, which I didn't really deeply relate to, in which everything had this kind of magical fairy tale type of aspect to it, which you weren't really meant to understand. You were just meant to accept as being true. Whereas this explanation through the Indian Tibetan version is talking about something basic about the nature of consciousness itself, not like predicting the next solar eclipse or anything like that, but just how things appear to our consciousness and how we react to it. I think maybe that's the hint, is that there was a lot of baggage associated with the word omniscience, which was not really the heart of what it meant. It meant that perhaps that there's just nothing preventing things to appear in the clear mirror of the mind. Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. Oops. Okay. Well, folks, I'm sure there's others questions, but no time for it. And I want to repeat that I've left my email address. So if there's something you want to follow up or ask a question, If it's within my power to give an answer, I will. And if not, sometimes I might be able to direct you to where that answer can be found, right? But now, as I mentioned before, a spiritual practice, again, from the Indian Tibetan tradition, at least, is not considered complete unless three components are present in it. And actually, this is true for any action, but it's especially relevant if we're trying to train our mind, tame our mind. So that action, that activity of trying to gain realizations and so forth, it should have a proper beginning, a proper middle, and a proper end. So the proper beginning is to approach it with the best motivation that we can, you know? Which means not just thinking, oh, I'm going to do this practice because it'll give me personal power, or I'll get a great reputation, or people will think very highly of me, or maybe I'll learn how to walk through walls and surprise everybody. You know, put aside all of those selfish motivations and think, just as I wish to be happy, so does everyone. How wonderful it would be to be able to provide people with happiness. And the more I approach a state of enlightenment, the more I'll be able to bring people to the true happiness that we all desire. And so I'm going to attend this teaching, or recite this mantra, or build this statue, or, you know, whitewash the walls of a monastery, whatever it is, whatever the action is, try to do it with the best motivation, the most expansive motivation we can. And there are many teachings which talk about the levels of motivation that we can progressively cultivate. But we try to cultivate the best that we can to begin with. It's the motivation of the action which is the major determining factor of whether that action is going to be effective or not. It's not the action itself, it's the motivation behind it. Quite a different conception of the reality we live in. But we do live in a mentally conditioned universe, and so the intention is part of that mental condition of the universe, and it makes the practices that we do beneficial if they're present. It deprives those actions of efficacy if the motivation is unclear or muddied. Okay, so the first part is to enter it with as best a motivation as we can. The second part is to engage in whatever the practice is, whatever the teaching is, whatever we're focusing on our mind, with as single-pointed concentration as possible. You know, trying to stay on each point, consider them, try not to forget them, try not to be distracted, like that. And of course, that's a big that can present a big difficulty. I know from my mind, it's very, very easily distracted by almost anything. So, but for the action to be as complete as possible, while it's taking place, we should be as concentrated on it as we can. And then finally, when the activity is over, and in this case, it's the activity of participating in this weekend session. And remember, even though I'm the one who's doing, you know, well over 90% of the jaw wagging and speaking, you know, anyone who's present is participating, you know, as long as what's being said, you're thinking about it. Doesn't mean you're agreeing with. In fact, disagreeing with it, questioning it, is very, very much part of participating in the practice, right? But when it's over, when it comes to an end, you look back on whatever positive energy may have been generated by whatever level of participation we've engaged in, then that positive energy we dedicate. We dedicate it. And we dedicate it in terms of the initial motivation. So if the initial motivation was that this practice will allow us to be as beneficial as possible, then the dedication at the end should take that same form of being beneficial. of being directed towards beneficial aims, beneficial goals. So there is a dedication practice which I like very much because it abbreviates and puts together many of the dedications that my own teachers have used separately in the years that I've studied, and it to my mind it amalgamates them all into a meaningful whole. So I'll just read from here. Understand, and the way it starts in mid-sentence. So maybe I should back up. Remember, the main obstacle on the spiritual path to be overcome, other than selfishness, is just viewing things as if they were self-existent, as if they're solid, concrete, individual entities instead of dependent arisings. Remember, that's the basis of the wisdom teachings. Okay, so the dedication starts with an understanding based on that. Understanding that nowhere within the three spheres of the dedication that we're about to make. So what are the three spheres of the dedication we're about to make? That is ourself, that's the sphere of the person making the dedication, the aims to which we're dedicating, and the act of dedication itself. Those are the three spheres of the act of dedication. And every action has these three spheres: the actor, the act, and the acted upon. Okay? So understanding that nowhere within the three spheres of dedication is there even one atom of concrete self-existent. Dedicate all the meritorious energy and whatever insight you may have generated through this practice, so that, first of all beings may be freed from their mental and physical suffering. That His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Kyabje Sopa Rinpoche, and all spiritual friends revealing true paths to happiness, higher rebirth, liberation, and full enlightenment may be endowed with long, fruitful lives. Thirdly, that we may come under the benevolent care of such compassionate gurus in this and in all future states of existence. And finally, and so that we may attain full enlightenment as swiftly as possible in order to repay the infinite kindness we've received from each and every sentient being, thereby making this life truly worthwhile and meaningful. And as a personal dedication at the end, I would like to say that during the course of this weekend, through lack of knowledge, through forgetfulness, and other limitations, there have been things that I've said that do not reflect the true meaning of the teachings I've received. And my wish is that all of those mistakes be like a finger drawing in water, leaving no impression behind. On the other hand, through the good fortune of having come under the benevolent care of such extraordinary teachers as Geshe Ngawang Targe, Lama Thupten Yeshe, Kyabje Sopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and many other extraordinary teachers, I've been exposed to these most valuable, precious teachings. And so, if I have been able to convey even a small fraction of the insightful experiences that my teachers have laid before me to others, then my wish is that they take deep root in our consciousness, stay and grow there until the realizations leading to full enlightenment are fully achieved. That is my own personal wish. And then finally, this teaching is being given remotely, but its main locus, its main focus is the Shantideva Center in Brooklyn. So on that level, I wish that all the beings who come to be associated with the Shantideva Center and come there searching for temporary and ultimate relief from suffering and experience of happiness, well-being, and enlightenment, have their wishes fulfilled just as they desire. So, thank you, everyone. You've been extremely patient, and I'm very much appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste. Namaste.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did
So
you want
unless-
to do dedication prayers? Did you want to do any more prayers?
No, as I said, that's up to you. If you want to do more dedication prayers, I'm very happy for you to lead them.
Jennifer?
Oh, I think that dedication was lovely. Maybe a dedication for your long life, John, and to continue to guide us and guide many students in the Dharma. And maybe a dedication that we can practice the sadhana sometime. That I don't know if any others would be interested, but it was very beautiful, the little taste that we received earlier. And yes, your continued health and the welfare of all beings based on these words. Thank you.
And to teach again at Shantideva Center very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I do recall something within the dedication was dedication for the long life of our teachers. But what I was reminded of is that very often at the end, there are specific prayers for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Khepche Sopa Rinpoche. And if anyone there would like to lead those, that would be wonderful. Sheila or Jennifer, if you want to read those in English or in Tibetan as a way of bringing this to a close, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Sheila, did you want to screen share or?
Yeah. Here we go. Should we just want to go to the long life prayers?
Yeah, I think so.
No. Wait. Where is it?
There we go.
Sorry. Start here?
Yeah. Did you want to lead, Sheila? Or?
No. Would you please, Jennifer?
Okay. For His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subdurer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long.
Thank you so much. So for now, goodbye, but I'm sure we'll meet again in the future. And I appreciate having this chance to meet all of you. And hopefully before too long, we'll be able to meet not relying on a computer screen, but actually in person. Thank you. Goodbye.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, John. Happy New Year, everybody.
Mm.
Thank you.